Ladies and gentlemen, the event is about to start. Please take your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, the event is about to start. Please take your seats.
Thanks for coming in and sitting down with us. We're really excited to meet a few good engineers to join the Pied Piper team.
So why don't you tell us a little about yourself?
I don't work before noon or after 2 p.m. And I need to bring my dog to work. Are you dog friendly?
Oh yeah, you can bring your dog to work.
That's not what I asked. Are you dog friendly?
Nice pool. Can my dog go in?
Yeah, we're very dog friendly.
Is there a lifeguard? Because my dog can't swim.
Now, it says here on your resume that from 2010 to 2011, you crushed it?
But that's actually an old resume. It should also read that I crushed it from 2013 to present.
So are we to understand that you did not crush it in 2012?
How many Silicon Valley fans do we have here today? Yeah. How many of you would rather work for Pied Piper than Hooli? Come on, everyone wants to work for Pied Piper. Welcome to another session of RBC Disruptors. My name is John Stackhouse, and it's my pleasure to host these sessions where we get together to talk to interesting people about innovation and how technology is changing the world all around us. And today we're going to talk about entrepreneurship, which is, of course, at the root of so much positive disruption in our economy and in our society. And we're asking the question, how do we all think a bit more like a startup? For those of you joining us on Facebook Live and WebEx, welcome. Please share your comments and questions through Facebook Live, and we'll make sure our guests speak to them. And those of you here in the audience, welcome back. You can also follow and join the conversation on Facebook Live. So to talk about entrepreneurship, I'm joined by three good friends and friends of RBC, Daryl McMullen, Laura Buehler, and Jamie Schulman. And we'll get them to talk a bit more about what each of them is doing. But Daryl on the far left is CEO of Gold Money. It's a great fintech company. It's actually turning a profit, so we'll hear a bit more about that. Daryl was a driving force behind PayPal for a number of years in Canada, and was also behind the successful launches and rapid growth of both eBay and Chapters Indigo. Laura is the executive director of C100, and we'll talk more about the growing partnership that RBC has with C100. It's a nonprofit, member-driven organization in Silicon Valley that is really passionate about connecting Canada and the Valley, connecting entrepreneurs in both places, and also connecting them with ambitious companies. And we'll hear a lot more from Laura about where they're going in the years ahead. And last but not least is Jamie Schulman, who's the co-founder and CEO of HubDoc. It's a company that delivers automated document collaboration for accountants and small businesses. I'll leave it to him to explain more about that. But Jamie also co-founded Sparkroom and was previously VP of Digital at Indigo. So Daryl, Laura, and Jamie, welcome to Disruptors. Thanks for spending some time with us here today.
Thank you.
We're going to We're going to start with just a quickie. We heard some pet peeves in the Silicon Valley clip and wanted to get your pet peeves or irks about big companies. From an entrepreneur's perspective, or Laura, from your group's perspective, what are the things about large corporates, we're not naming any names here, that kind of raise some eyebrows with entrepreneurs? Jamie, maybe I can turn to you first.
Yeah, thanks for having us. I would say I could think of a long list, but one thing that comes to mind that I've found is that oftentimes large companies don't necessarily appreciate or maybe don't even understand some real constraints that entrepreneurial companies have. Like real time constraints would be a big one, and they just can't fathom it. And we need to move quickly, the reasons for that, and I think it was Reid Hoffman who said, if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you're taking too long. So we're just constantly moving quickly. And an example of the disconnect would be, I think I might have told you this story, was I was coming down to meet with a large company. It may have been a bank. And I was here with our head of products. It was the two of us for a 60-person meeting. And we walked into the room for a 60-minute meeting, and we walked into the room, and there were 15 or 20 people around a boardroom, around a boardroom table, and it was just my colleague and I. And the first 10 to 15 minutes was an exchange of business cards and introductions, and we finally got down to the conversation about a potential business deal. And near the end, I said, "Well, this sounds great. I hope we can figure out a way to do this. Is it okay if we try and move quickly? Just because we have a lot of bandwidth." And they said, "That's great. We can move quickly, especially when it involves software, because we now deploy the agile method and we do sprints. So we move quickly too." And my colleague and I said, "Well, that's great." And so when they ended the meeting by saying, "Well, next steps are we'd love to set up bi-weekly meetings for the next 12 months." So that's my story. So that's never going to work for us, no matter how big the potential opportunity is.
We'll work on that. Laura,
this is a very common experience from what I'm hearing from our entrepreneurship community is what our big corporate friends call the ERP process, which can be a multi-month process, or procurement is a very challenging one for entrepreneurs. But I think it actually goes the other way as well. Actually, you were saying something about
startups.
The opposite kind of is true as well. It's difficult for...
Yeah, it can be. Good morning, everyone, by the way. It's great to be here. Great to see a full room. And, I applaud RBC and John for putting these things on. They're awesome events, and it's important, I think, for everyone in the ecosystem. I think... sometimes entrepreneurs go to big businesses too early as well because the gap is so big. It's very difficult for a large company to actually see how they would implement that or justify a use case or a meaningful proof of concept when you haven't been able to do it yourself. So often I mentor several entrepreneurs and have invested in a number of startups too. And part of that balance is like building out your own moat and your own value proposition. Put yourself on the other side of the table. Right? If you were that enterprise or representing that enterprise, how would you manage that conversation if you don't come to the table with the right value proposition or figuring out how you can actually work within that company? So is that kind of where you're going with it? I think there's a balance there, but I think it's frustrating for a lot of entrepreneurs to get the right level of sponsorship internally. And I think it's initially setting the right conversation and figuring out who's the right sponsor internally and getting that cycle going.
So maybe, Daryl, I can get you to expand a bit and tell us a bit about your company, about Gold Money, what you're trying to do with it, what problem you're trying to solve that you think you can solve that larger organizations might not, but also maybe connect it to how you're working with large organizations and what you've learned from that.
Yeah, I think in our experience at Gold Money, so Gold Money, if some of you may or may not have heard of it, we're headquartered here in Toronto, started about 2 years ago. Our first year was all about growth. We're an online payments and savings platform domiciled in gold. We saw all the hype and buzz going on around blockchain and digital ledger technology and cryptocurrencies. and love all of that cool technology, love the idea of fintech and what's happening on top of fiat money. But we also think gold is probably the best currency that's arguably been left behind from an innovation standpoint. So how do you take blockchain, distributed ledger, put it on the world's best currency to create this a meaningful value prop? So it kind of looks and feels like a PayPal account, but domiciled in gold. It's done very well. First 2 years, raised $70 million, went public on the Toronto Stock Exchange, so we can talk about our numbers. We just announced our latest earnings, a little more than $500 million in gross revenue, and we've turned a profit in our first 2 years. So excited on where we're going, and we're in 140 countries already. Our first year, though, we started conversations with banks early on. And yeah, same type of thing. 15 people on the table, 4 lawyers, more questions than opportunities. And we said, let's go back and actually build our own moat. Let's get to our first 1 million users, show those meaningful use cases. But it's still important, I think, to have those initial dialogues and conversations, because at the end of the day, productivity comes out of relationships within companies, with partners who you're dealing with. And so early stage, I've very much focused on seeding the conversation, building those relationships, getting people to understand what we're doing. There's no business opportunity yet, but let's keep the conversation going. And that was between banks and the Facebooks and the Googles of the world. 12 to 18 months later, they're calling us saying, hey, we see what you're doing. Let's talk about what's going on here and seeing how we can actually start working together and building solutions together. But it wasn't until we got to a certain stage and the fact that we already nurtured and built that relationship over time that was key.
And we'll come back to this debate about profitability versus growth, because that's one of the great tensions for any entrepreneur and for those working with entrepreneurs. But Jamie, I want to hear about HubDoc and a bit of your journey, and then we'll come back to Laura for the C100 story.
Sure. So what HubDoc is, in a nutshell, is we're a startup here in Toronto, and we're automating accounting and bookkeeping for small businesses. And so I think we all know that cloud technologies have disrupted a number of industries. Banking would be one, travel, and others. And so in accounting and bookkeeping, it's just getting going. And so the way that we automate the bookkeeping and accounting is our software will go out and fetch source documents for a business from anywhere online. So from RBC, we would be automatically fetching bank statements and check images and deposit images and bills. We'd be going to all sorts of sites, Rogers, TELUS Bell, and PayPal, and the rest, to pull in the key documents automatically. And then our software pulls out key data from the documents and creates the entries in the accounting system. So essentially, it's eliminating a significant amount of administrative work that accountants and bookkeepers would typically do. And our customers are the accountants and the bookkeepers specifically. And so we have thousands of accounting and bookkeeping firms as paying customers now, and tens of thousands of businesses. And we launched it about 3 years ago. We started it a bit earlier. We're up to about 50 people now and growing quite quickly. But the broader idea behind this is, and I used to be an attorney, don't hold that against me, but is that areas like law and accounting, and in some cases medicine, a lot of what they've traditionally done as professionals is being automated away with artificial intelligence and machine learning, and that's happening. And so we're an example in the accounting sphere where we are automating away a lot of what accountants and bookkeepers have traditionally done. And so essentially what HubDoc is doing is enabling and empowering these firms, from the really big ones right down to the tiny ones, empowering them to survive and then thrive in a world of AI and machine learning. And so far so good.
And how do you help your partners, your clients, think about these sorts of opportunities as transformational opportunities? It's not just buying software, plugging it in, and letting it run.
Yeah,
it's about them transforming as well.
That's a great question. So there's this shift to the cloud, as I said, in accounting and bookkeeping, again, all sizes of firms. And we're at a point now where the conversations are no longer about should I or shouldn't I. It's kind of when and how fast. And so we're not really typically in sale mode. We do demos and show software, but it's really about helping them through thinking through how they are going to evolve their practice. And that involves people, process, and we would say a tech stack, a technology stack as well. They often come at it and say, oh, I should use HubDoc and I should use these other tools, but we step back and really help them think through workflows. How would you change your practice and how you approach clients, onboard them? And we think through the people, the process, and the technology. So that's a lot of what we do. It's not just we're selling software and then, and move from there.
Right. Laura, let's hear a bit more about the C100 story. You just took over this year as executive director and have great ambitions for it. We'll give you a sneak peek in a little while of some content that RBC and C100 are producing together. But give us the bigger picture of C100 and where it's
Thanks, John.
going.
So C100 is a nonprofit Silicon Valley-based organization for Canadians. Our mission is to support and accelerate Canada's innovation economy. We do that largely through community, mentorship, thought leadership, and we really are, I think, Canada's secret weapon in Silicon Valley. The C100 network is made up of experienced entrepreneurs, two of which are on this stage, seasoned technology executives and venture capitalists based in Silicon Valley and in Canada. And so we run a number of programs that really are at the heart of it is entrepreneurs, and we support entrepreneurs.
And what are they looking for from big corporates? When you talk to your members about corporate Canada, what are they looking for, and how can we help?
So there are a couple of major things that entrepreneurs are usually looking for when they come through our programs and are looking for access to corporates. The first is, of course, they need access to customers. So if they're in a space where they're selling a business, getting that critical first corporate customer from Canada and from the United States or abroad, for that matter, is a critical step in the life cycle of a startup. The other thing is partners, and what you hear a lot in the tech industry is partnerships, which is a different thing than finding customers, right? They're looking for corporates that they can kind of piggyback on and partner with in order to scale their sales to their target customers.
Yeah, that partnership word is so critical. It gets thrown around like a cliche, but it's a very different mindset from having a customer. I wonder if I can take you all back to those are great kind of foundational points about where you're coming from, but I want to take you back to the question of this event. How do we think like a startup? And maybe turn to you, Daryl, and get some insights apart from having fewer people at meetings. Okay, we get that, but how do large organizations think a little more entrepreneurially?
I think there's different stages of an entrepreneurial life too. So if a company's just starting out, that first, whether it's seed, pre-seed, or post-seed, or Series 1, the entrepreneur is leading. He has a vision, or he or she has a vision on what that company wants to look like. So they do actually have to be very materialist or military-like in saying, being drilled through things, cutting through, being very directive as to what needs to happen. I think what happens too then, the next stage is how do you then have the business scale beyond that? So there's clear direction to everyone what needs to happen, but then they actually need to start grooming accountability and leadership. And the good startups actually start doing that, where they actually have 2 or 3 or 4 other people who are now leading their groups very efficiently, but there's a very clear level of accountability, a clear level of communication, and a real sense of urgency against the opportunity. So the idea of meeting cultures and biweekly meetings, and that just doesn't work. I mean, like 2 weeks is too much time if they're trying to task certain things. I look at, even in Gold Money, I think we had a total of 3 meetings in our first 12 months. That was it. A lot of Slack conversations, a lot of cut to the chase, yes, no, what do we need to do to do this? But it's very important for the leaders in an organization. I worry sometimes at corporates that they push the problem all the way down. I'm being honest here in saying that I think corporates need to look at their leadership as well, and how are they grooming their leaders and asking the right questions, providing the right accountability to everyone within their group in order to make sure people are actually doing things a lot more efficiently that way.
Yeah, it's a great point about communications tools, and Slack being a good illustration of that. I mean, meetings often aren't needed. You can communicate through all sorts of other channels. It's just way more efficient.
I look at most failures come down to a misalignment of expectations or breakdown in communications.
What do you mean by misalignment of expectations?
Either expectations on timelines or expectations on resources, how much effort, time you're going to put into something, the level of commitment. That's failures within a company or failures within a partnership between a bigger company. A lot of times an entrepreneur is thinking, oh, I'm going to get a deal done with RBC and we're going to be up and running and have 1 million customers in 6 months. Let's be real here. That's not going to happen. And especially when you have not even 1,000 of your own customers yet. So you need to set that expectation line too. But so figuring out what does inning one look like in a relationship? How do you start snowballing that relationship and start getting points on the board to actually start nurturing something? You do want an end state and want to figure out where you want to be, but people tend to try and boil the ocean on a bigger project versus trying to figure out what the stages are.
Yeah, that's a great point. I often find with entrepreneurs coming here, they're essentially thinking, you can hear them say this, if I can only get RBC as a customer or a partner, then everything, because my product's amazing. And usually the product isn't, as you were saying, quite ready yet. So there's an imbalance of expectations. But Laura, you were going to jump on that point.
I was actually just going to jump in because we talked about Slack, which is a little known fact in Canada that the CEO and founder of Slack is also Canadian. So we have a culture of entrepreneurship. We're not always good about talking about it and telling those stories, but I just was going to jump in and it seemed like a more opportune time before. But.
Yeah, Stuart Butterfield.
Yeah.
We're trying to get him for a disruptor, so lobby on our behalf. But we're going to come back to the stories point and show one of the stories. But Jamie, what can we do, or what can large organizations do to think a bit more like a startup?
Yeah, I was listening to Daryl there, and that comment about misaligned expectations and communication made me think about transparency. I know it. My business partner, Jamie McDonald, and I were on our second startup together over 10 years, and we've really focused on transparency. I do this at home with my wife and kid. My wife and I with our kids is transparency, just being honest, straightforward, regardless of what the news is or what you're talking about or what timelines might be. I think transparency is very important, and to the extent that transparency often empowers people. People have a better sense of what they're doing, what's going on, and how they can be a part of it. So transparency would be one. The second quick thing I'd add is what I'm finding, and this might dovetail into another conversation, but what we're trying to do at HubDoc is, like at its highest level, is create an incredible world-class work experience for each of our individual employees. Like that's really all we're doing. And that does translate into building a great product we think will deliver incredible value to customers, but it really starts with the people, and so it's how we recruit them, how we treat them, providing the opportunities to learn, and so perhaps, I imagine RBC does this quite well, but the idea of really thinking through performance and helping people figure out a path to learning and to excelling in their career may be a way to do things a little bit differently. I know for us that's really worked in attracting great people who then stay and love being there.
Are you dog friendly?
I
take that as a no.
I have a friend who works at a startup, and they are dog friendly, and he told me the story how someone asked that exact question, so they allowed dogs. Other people started bringing their dogs, and then he found that when they were interviewing, some people are allergic to dogs. And there were a couple of great candidates they had who just couldn't work there, and so they had this dilemma of, do they drop the dog-friendly policy? And so anyhow,
you really have to pick a lane.
You have to pick a lane.
Dog-friendly or allergy-friendly.
Let's talk a bit more about talent, because that's so critical, obviously, to all organizations today. We're all in a war for talent. A lot of startups think they have a kind of a cultural advantage over corporates, and corporates are trying to learn from that. But Jamie, you and I have talked previously about talent and how you hire. You've got 50 people.
We're about 50 people now, yeah.
So how do you go after talent? How do you screen? What kind of qualities are you looking for that are both entrepreneurial and are going to help you become more business-minded and a bit more corporate?
No, I know what you're referring to. I mentioned that too. What we started to do, so we've doubled our team, or more than doubled our team in the past 6 months. So we're growing quite quickly, and we're continuing to go after this opportunity. And I've been rethinking, and how we recruit and how we acquire talent. And one area we focused on was looking at what characteristics of individuals ended up having being successful with HubDoc and successful as individuals in the company. And so a lot of the standard characteristics you think of, which is the smarts, and they're driven, and they're resourceful and independent and team playing, low ego, like that was very important to us. But one that popped up that we weren't necessarily expecting was curiosity, and being, I think I referred to as interesting and interested. And so I focus on the revenue side at HubDoc, and specifically on the sales side. With a colleague, we've helped revamp our recruiting process. And so what we do now is, on the sales side, is we start with an initial screen. Often it's a video screen. And then once the person kind of makes it through this screen, we then ask them to call in and sell us HubDoc. So treat us like an accounting firm and please sell us HubDoc. And then on the call, it's a short call, we then ask them, we give them feedback, and we say, this is where we think you did a great job, well done, and here's some areas you could do better. Could we ask you to please call back in a minute and do the call again? And so what that's done, obviously, is it's tested resourcefulness. Could they figure out what we do and how to sell? And then it tests their ability to communicate. But then by asking them to listening to how they receive the feedback and then asking them to call again, that obviously tests coachability. Did they listen to the feedback and did they incorporate it in their second call? And then if they get through that stage, the final one is we ask everyone to come in and present to us, deliver a presentation, maybe 3 to 5 slides, 20 or so minutes, on anything at all that they're passionate about. We just say, come talk to us about something you're passionate about. And this has worked. So they come in, and we've had people talk about fly fishing. This week, someone did a whole presentation on the Dave Matthews Band. Who knew? But what it's doing, obviously, is it's just showing they start talking about something they're passionate about. It then leads to a conversation about other interests. What other things are they interested in? What are you reading? What are we reading? And at the end of the day, it's because at our company, people don't just do a job and then go home. It's a lot of looking around. How else does this place work? And why are we doing that over in marketing, or isn't this something we should be doing better over here? So they're thinking about other areas because they're curious and they're interested. So that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, that's a great story, great illustration that we could all learn from. Laura, I want to hear a bit more about the C100 members and their interest in talent, because you've got a growth summit coming up in October, and it's all about talent, because that, as we've discussed before, is what your members are obsessing with.
Yes.
In the Valley, the fiercest battleground probably in the world for talent. But what are they talking about, and what can we learn from those conversations?
So, the theme is talent, because it is fiercely the most critical conversation that we need to be having as a country and as a community of technologists. This is the number one issue that our startups are facing, and I don't mean just the ones in Silicon Valley. Really, we're supporting Canadian startups, so this is a big challenge in Canada. It's not a uniquely Canadian issue. I think that if you're in tech, talent is always the crux of what you need to scale, probably. But in Canada specifically, when we talk to entrepreneurs in Canada, particularly those that are what we call scale-ups or growth stage startups, there are critical positions and leadership that are still very difficult for them to find. And so there's two things, it's A, they can't actually find a lot of people with those skill sets and experience, and B, they need to actually think about cultivating the existing talent pool to fill that leadership void. But it is, I heard actually, I've been this week just talking to CEOs here in Canada, and one person told me, it's the running joke, I've had this role open for 2 years. So it's a really big issue. So we're focusing entirely on talent for this next Growth Summit, just to help people have those conversations, learn from talent experts in Silicon Valley and in Canada, and hopefully bring those lessons back to Canada.
Daryl, we had a great question pop up from our Facebook audience asking, if you have only 3 meetings a year, how do you get diverse feedback, both from your fellow entrepreneurs and your partners?
Feedback's hourly and daily. Like, I don't need to have an hour meeting to get feedback. It can be an ongoing dialogue and a communication with someone. Typically, even if I do have meetings, like they're very efficient. I go into the meetings making sure I have the right thoughtful questions going into it versus spending 15 minutes trying to figure out business cards. One of the questions, if there is a big table, I've been around those big tables all the time, and the first question I'll ask is, who are you and why are you here? What are you trying to get at? Maybe you're just trying to be informed. Are you accountable? Are you a decision maker in this process? Like, getting much more direct understanding why people are a part of this conversation, what they're trying to get out of it. And I think that actually, going back to kind of the whole idea of people looking for talent, people are always looking for talent. the interesting thing, most category leaders in any field, they've created a lot of talent. They've groomed a lot of talent, and that's actually part of their culture, is actually investing in their people, investing in their processes on how they run meetings, how they get the right questions, how they get the right leaders to mentor the people on their teams. And so it doesn't matter if your organization's 50 people, 5,000 people, or 25,000 people. I've seen a big difference in different companies and how they operate. And I was telling you even before we got on stage, I've spent probably the last year, probably 50 of the top 100 banks in the world I've had meetings with. They're all very different in terms of their talent pools, the questions they ask, the stage they're at, and the innovation cycles and whatnot. But I think it's important as a company, and whether you own a department or whether you own a division or whether you own a startup, how are you investing in your own people and your processes to create talent, to create that kind of operation? This is how we roll as a company, as opposed to bringing talent in all the time and trying to figure out how to mesh it all together.
So, as an entrepreneur, I mean, you're often in a life or death situation. Not often, probably every day you are. How much time do you spend on talent?
I think as a leader, you need to spend a lot. So earlier I was talking about early stage of a project or a company. The leader needs to be very task-oriented to figure out how to get the alignment of people. You then have to quickly pivot to being task-oriented to people-oriented, to making sure you're holding people accountable on the team. Otherwise, everyone's looking for you for the answers, as opposed to having a team that's bringing all the solutions to you. And I think that's important. And it doesn't matter what size the organization. I've seen that even within PayPal when I was there. Look, when I started at PayPal, it was like 200 employees, and when I left, it was 14,000. But there was culture of innovations and pockets there still that were growing and accelerating and moving faster than anyone else in the industry because of the way they groom talent and the way they actually manage their business.
What was the single thing that you remember most about PayPal in terms of its ability to maintain innovation through that extraordinary growth?
It wasn't easy. There was certainly a lot of growing pains, and as you start adding layers, and I think even as an organization, it realistically, would take 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Sometimes, whether it's just disrupting yourself. Don't be afraid to disrupt yourself, and the idea of legacy departments or legacy operations. So your job changes. Okay, we're going to shift it over here, but it's going to be a lot more meaningful for you in creating the right opportunities for people. Because at the end of the day, people, whether they're joining a startup or a larger corporation, they're looking for opportunity. They're wanting to be a part of something. People join opportunities and they leave people. I see that consistently almost all the time. They join opportunities and they leave people, whether they leave their direct manager or the people that they work with, or they just feel like they're not able to do what they want to do. So as a leader, I think it's very important to figure out how you actually groom the right talent within a team. That's kind of company size agnostic, in my opinion.
Jamie, we've got a question here for you from Facebook. Back to the mock sales calls. Do you ask your tech, or you require your tech staff to do that?
We don't. Where we are at the moment is each area of the business, so it could be tech and the development team, or sales, or et cetera, marketing, customer success, and support. We are developing our own processes around recruiting, so we don't. One thing we do though, that's a good idea. I'm trying to think, that would be a fun idea. Maybe not, because that might lead to tech questions for the salespeople, and that's not a good path to go down. But one thing we do that has turned out to be incredibly valuable is for everyone that starts at HubDoc, they do 1 month of customer support, and we call that HubDoc University. I think Jeff Bezos did this at Amazon. I think others do this, but so we've instituted that. It's painful sometimes because you could hire someone today on August 17th, and they start on September 1st. They're not really in their seat until effectively November, because they have this month on support. But having everyone do a month on customer support is incredibly valuable. As you can imagine, just talking to customers. I mean, they do a bit of training first, but then they're on the calls, on email, on chat, et cetera, talking to customers for that first month. So that's something we do across.
What's the biggest thing they learn?
Oh, I think it just most people, or many people, haven't done customer support, and so I think they just learn it sounds cliche, but to be in the shoes of the customer and just understand. They're not all negative. They're often, how does this work? How do I do this? They're often very positive. And so I think the biggest thing is they just learn how the customers and prospects are viewing our product, which is very different than because we're staring at it every day. For them, it's a different vantage point.
So a year ago, some of you will remember, we had a great disruptor session talking about the Valley versus Canada. And it was with C100 members. And one of the big takeaways from that conversation was we do not celebrate our entrepreneurs enough as a country. So we kind of took that away as a good signal and thought, how do we tell our stories a little bit better? And from that conversation and a lot of hard work at C100, as well as by a group here at RBC, we've built up a video program, if I can call it that. And we're going to show the first video. This hasn't been distributed publicly, but we're launching the landing page, I think, today, and starting to share our stories. That's literally the name of the video. So if that's queued up, we can let it roll, and then we'll hear from Laura a bit more about what we're going to do with our stories. So take it away.
Like many entrepreneurs, we had many ups and many downs, and there was a moment about a year into the business where we really didn't have, things were not working, and we had struggled to raise enough financing to keep the business going, and did this last-ditch effort to try and sign a customer by flying down to this travel conference in Atlanta to give a presentation. And I remember that I was the keynote speaker at this conference, and I couldn't even afford a taxi to get from my hotel to because I was staying at this cheap motel, to get to my cheap motel to the fancy hotel where the conference is being held. I had to walk along the freeway in Atlanta for 2 miles, and I remember sitting on the side of the freeway in my suit on the way to this conference thinking, what the heck am I doing? Why am I here? I'm such a failure. And that was the lowest point of my professional life.
Awesome.
All right, well done. So we're going to have some more information for you on how to sign up for that at the end of the show. But Laura, congratulations first of all on this launch, and tell us where you want to take it.
Well, congrats to all of us, and congrats to Canada for producing such incredible entrepreneurs. Let me just ask everybody a question too. If you think about your favorite entrepreneur, the best entrepreneur in the world, just think about who comes to mind. Okay, and now if I asked you to say the same thing about who's your favorite Canadian entrepreneur, who's an example of a really incredible, Canadian entrepreneur, and it can't be one of these two because you already know who they are. Well, usually when we ask that question, it's difficult for people to bring an image to mind. Maybe that speaks to who we are as Canadians, that we don't like to toot our own horn very often, but we think those stories need to be shared. And we think they need to be shared because they inspire and help future entrepreneurs. And they get the word out about the great things that are coming out of Canada. So at C100, we get actually some pretty privileged access to this because our organization is founded on entrepreneurship and is founded on getting experienced entrepreneurs to mentor new entrepreneurs, building new businesses, getting access to Silicon Valley and the rest of the world. If you're lucky enough to be at a C100 event, you get to hear that stuff too. But if you're not, then what? We just can't share that story? No. So we actually, thanks to RBC, are working on this initiative to record the stories of great Canadian innovation stories and share them with the world. The target is the entrepreneur. I imagine that there are a lot of people who may not be leading great companies as entrepreneurs, but may feel like an entrepreneur. This is for you too. So there's some stuff that we've already recorded, like the wonderful video you just saw of Jeff Lewis. The other thing is we're actually going to be doing live sessions with some of these great Canadian innovators, where entrepreneurs can watch live, send their questions in advance, and get that kind of one-on-one feeling of one-on-one time with a great Canadian thought leader.
That's great. Well done. Really excited to see where you take this. Let's talk a bit about failure, because that's often one of the sort of defining traits of entrepreneurs. They say, yeah, we fail, we learn from our failure, we grow, or else we bail. So, Jamie and Daryl, I want to ask you each maybe to share your equivalent of the Jeff Lewis freeway story. But actually, I'm going to steal another question or borrow from Laura about who your favorite entrepreneur is. Since she posed the question, maybe you can both answer that first. Daryl.
Oh boy, favorite entrepreneur. Let me think about that for a second, because we're thinking a larger scale, or someone who's local. So, actually, if I think of someone local, someone who I actually like, who's very humble, very quiet, probably doesn't get nearly as much. Mike McDermott at FreshBooks. Yeah. I remember meeting him for the first time. That was a startup in his mother's dining room. And Toby very early on as well at Shopify type of thing. They were very humble, very quiet, very focused though on building a company, very focused on investing in his people, asks really intelligent questions that he's trying to understand his customer, trying to understand the solutions, but really challenging his own team on trying to figure out how do you actually build this business up. So I do like that. I guess flipping back to your failures. I think if you're not failing, that's a bigger problem. I think everyone has failures. I haven't had to walk along a highway for 2 hours looking for a sandwich, but I think we've all had failures in companies, and I think it goes back to what I messaged earlier about learning about expectations and communications and understanding how you actually deal with that. And I think it's worthwhile processing your failures and understand where they actually went wrong. A lot of it does come down to that. So trying to figure out how to address those the next time. Don't be afraid of it. It happens. Happens more than the win. So just embrace that. That's okay. But I think actually as a culture and as a leader, you need to be able, if someone does fail, making sure that they learn why it failed. Was it you? Was it someone else? If you're pointing fingers at someone else, well, what happened there? Were they misaligned with you? Did you not set the right expectation? So you should always be grooming leadership within your organization to deal with failures, adjust with them, and not be afraid to do them. Saying, what did we learn from it? And now we're going to do this instead.
Do you have an approach within Gold Money to address failure or surface these conversations?
Yeah, we've had a lot of failures. Maybe they don't seem external as much. Operationally, people, priorities, that happens. It's not dwelling on them aggressively and trying to figure out how do you pivot and move to the next solution. You've got to be thick-skinned. You have to have those right conversations with an organization to saying, not about pointing blame. It's like, okay, we all failed. Why did it fail? It was either you or me, or it doesn't matter. It's done. So how do we not do this again? How do we make sure that we do something differently and focusing on the next move?
Great. Jamie, favorite entrepreneur? Can't let you get away with addressing that.
I mean, on the big scale, Elon Musk comes to mind. I'm not alone.
Canadian.
And thinking big. I think that's when we think of that. On the failure side, there's so many things are rolling through my head. And as Daryl said, they're not necessarily all catastrophic, but they're, now, if you want a story, I mean, a quick story would be my co-founder and I had this previous business, and it was in the mortgage space. It was a company called Spark Room, and we had started it in 2007, and we were selling a marketing analytics platform and we started in the mortgage space, and then we were going to move along verticals. And for those that were thinking about things 2007, 2008, the mortgage vertical wasn't necessarily a great space to be selling to. It turned out perversely we were signing up customers like crazy through to 2007 and 2008 because it turned out a lot of mortgage companies were letting go their marketing departments, and our software allowed them to be much more efficient and get a bunch of insights. What we learned, and I guess the failure there, was that customers can go out of business. Like large billion-dollar mortgage lenders and companies can actually go right to zero. We were able to move into the education vertical, and things worked out for us. But it was, and then trying to raise money in late 08, early 09 in that environment was incredibly challenging. So it certainly felt like a failure at the time.
Yeah. Now, you've got great experience in a large company in Indico, as well as your own firms. Curious about how you approach the customer differently, and how does HubDoc approach customers differently? Maybe what can we learn from that?
That's a good question. I mentioned that we, as a starting point, that everyone does 1 month of customer support. So we talk about it all the time, and we have new employees starting every second Monday, and so we've got a whole new team coming in every 2 weeks that are being groomed to speak to customers. The first thing is customers are primary; they're top of mind always, and we do a ton of metrics, a lot of measuring, and we're trying to be data driven in everything we do. And so specifically on the customer support side, for example, it's down to the minute, hour, day, week, etc. How many calls are coming in, how many emails are coming in, and how quickly are we responding, how quickly are issues resolved, and we're thinking about this all the time. And it's not just the customer support team. We report on it and speak to it across the company, which goes to the issue of transparency. I'm thinking of Slack now. We're not meeting to talk about it. It's just all in a channel on Slack so we're constantly thinking about the metrics. And then I'd say finally, when I think of the feedback loop, I guess is how I'd call it, between the customer and the decision makers at our company, it couldn't be shorter. Now we're a smaller business, so it's harder with a much larger business. But the idea being, when customer issues flow through and some of them congregate into a particular issue or item, they can get in front of a product person or our development team or whoever needs to be making a decision very quickly. And so we get a ton of feedback, which we again measure on how quickly we respond to customer issues. And you just earn trust from customers the more you can be responsive, and they see that. So I think it's the measurement piece as well as the laser focus on them all the time.
Daryl.
Customer feedback is like one of the most critical and underused data sources. One of the questions I always ask is, every week, what have been the top 5, top 10 issues? What's flared up this week or not? But more importantly, what are we doing about it? So is this a bug? Is it copy or language that people are misinterpreting consistently on the site? Or is there a user experience or a flow? Or is there a partner breakdown? Or whatever the case is. So we actually have someone that kind of straddles customer service and the product team that actually has a prioritized roadmap directly related to customer solutions. So trying to figure out if there is consistently people in the US trying to deal with some sort of bank, linking it to gold money, and that's an issue. Like, how are we directly getting it on the roadmap, not waiting an entire quarter to do an evaluation and figuring it. Like, there is a separate swim lane for directly dealing with customer solutions. So.
Laura, there's a good question coming in from Facebook about the gender imbalance among entrepreneurs, and love to hear your thoughts, especially from the Valley, since that's been such a controversial source around this debate. But is there a problem, and what should we be thinking about? What should we be doing to help address it?
So I'll tell you what we are doing to address it, but more broadly, I think it's a little bit industry specific. So, right, the Facebook question is there a gender imbalance in entrepreneurship? I think the answer to entrepreneurship in general is no. There's a lot of entrepreneurs out there in various industries, whether it's small businesses or consumer packaged goods. In technology, however, we know there's a gender imbalance. And that comes right from the highest level right down to first-year developers. We do definitely have fewer women than we should. This is a very hot issue in Silicon Valley, as you know. It's a hot issue in Canada, too. I think we have an opportunity in Canada to treat this issue differently and get ahead of it in the way that some of the other technology ecosystems have not. Tell you what we're doing at C100. So we have a really competitive, awesome program for startups called 48 Hours in the Valley. This is for our early stage startups. We depend on nominations for who gets nominated into that program. And then, of course, there's a long selection process. But it's actually nominations where we think that we are suffering. And this year, we're going to ask our nominators to try to nominate at least one female-founded technology company And the intended effect of that is that we've got the community looking out for them. So that's one thing we're doing to try to address it.
That's a fantastic, and frankly, it's a great challenge to everyone watching or sharing this on Facebook as well as the live audience. If you know great companies, don't be shy. We all have a responsibility here. We can't just assume others are going to address this. So let's identify those great companies, those great entrepreneurs, and make sure they get nominated to something like 48 Hours. Daryl and Jamie, maybe you can talk a bit about this challenge in your own organizations. How do you think about it? How do you go about addressing it?
Yeah, I'm always conscious of it. Even at PayPal, actually had probably 60% women. Women get stuff done. It's great. No, and I actually do think it is important to identify and realize that there is proper mentorship that needs to happen, and understanding the confidence that needs to present itself as opportunities to be able to move forward and groom things. So I'm always very conscious on our end on trying to figure out less about a gender thing for me. It's actually more about the individual, and I try and understand the individual's strengths and what they need to understand, and how going back to that communication conversation, you can't communicate the same way to everyone. And whether that's a gender thing or a culture thing or a stage of experience thing, you need to understand how do you nurture and build that relationship with someone to be able to get the best and most effective relationship for anyone, both in terms of setting expectations and getting clarity into what they need to do and what they don't need to do. So I've always tried to make it very conscious on when you're managing anyone. It's for me, it's less about gender; it's about the individual. So I think it's important to address that.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I think you'll help me here. Was it Peter Drucker who said, "If you don't measure it, you can't manage it. Yeah. You can't improve something you're not measuring." Something to that effect. So again, what we've found ourselves focusing whenever we have an issue or something we're trying to solve, we think about how are we measuring it, and look at the data. And so just like in our sales team where we have a funnel around hiring, we do the same with recruiting. And so recruiting, the funnel, it's not customer leads converting into customers, it's candidates that come into the company, and then how do they get to the next phase of a screen, an interview, in-person, offer, acceptance. And so when you think of the funnel, we, on the recruiting side, we're thinking a lot now about, how do we make sure more women are coming to the top of the funnel? I mean, this is how we think about it. And so how can we do a better job making HubDoc an attractive place for women? Why aren't there more candidates coming in? They're women, and it's on us. And so it might be the way we describe the roles in our job descriptions. It might be where we're posting on the boards. It might be how we describe the company. I mean, I think there's a classic example that you talk about beer pong, or do you talk, or do you talk about other perks? I read that somewhere. But the idea just being that let's measure it. Let's look right through the funnel from top to bottom. How can we make this a more attractive place? Because the women are out there. We just have to, find them.
And has there been anything you've been able to adjust that has led to measurable change?
I think it's a work in progress. But right now, so far, I think on the job descriptions piece and where we're posting, we're finding that we're starting to get more candidates because we're thinking about it. I mean, the final thing I would say is if you make it a great place for women, which I hope our women employees would say that, we always ask everyone for referrals. And so if people, as they're thinking through referrals, we want them to make sure they're thinking about women as well as men.
Yeah. Another good question from Facebook about how to stay motivated during times of failure. And Laura, I'd love your perspective on the Valley, because you have so many firms, often those great young Canadian firms, coming to the Valley thinking they're going to make it, and you see them struggle. What do they need to be thinking about? Some of them are our clients or our friends or our partners. How do we help keep them motivated during those dark hours?
Well, I actually think that one of the things that we can do to remind entrepreneurs is how big we want them to make themselves and their businesses and their impact. What we hear from Canadian entrepreneurs who visit the Valley is that they leave thinking much bigger about the problem that they're trying to solve. Not to mention that they see a benchmark, they see competitors, they see people who are doing exactly what they're doing, but they're willing to work 100 hours a week. They're willing to ask for more money to fund them so they grow faster. They're trying to be aggressive about recruiting talent to help them grow faster. And so if we show entrepreneurs, this is the bar, go back to Canada, but you're meeting this. There's an adage in Silicon Valley that says you don't have to be in Silicon Valley, but Silicon Valley has to be in you. That's not my quote. That's a Silicon Valley adage. And so I think that that's something we need to really instill in our entrepreneurship community, is really thinking big and understanding how much it takes in aggression, in ambition, and in hard work to really scale a company and win.
It's not about ping pong tables and free food. It's about rigor, discipline, having the right conversations, and asking the right questions.
Right.
Yeah, I was going to say that we talked a bit earlier about characteristics of entrepreneurs and resilience, grit, powering through, being a self-starter. These are the sorts of things that when you're faced with troubling times, you kind of have to power. We live in this constant state of, I call it opt-to-panic, which is we're very optimistic about our opportunity, but we're in a constant state of panic around the product, the market, the competition. And so I think it was Mark Andreessen. He says two emotions for entrepreneurs: euphoria and terror.
So we're running euphoria and terror. That's an opt-to-panic. Great lines, but I love that line, especially Laura, about making sure Silicon Valley is in you if you're not in Silicon Valley. So that's a great message for us all to take away. Before we go, though, I want to show and share with you, if we can get it up, the new landing page for our stories. So please sign up for this today. Be among the first to join our rapidly growing community. Share it with your clients, with your partners, with your coworkers. We really are trying to build a great Canadian community here that is supportive of entrepreneurs. You don't need to be an entrepreneur to be entrepreneurial. So there's lots you can learn from here, from these stories. But please do enjoy them, share them, tell us of other stories that we should be paying attention to. For those of you who have been at Disruptors before, you know that we make a charitable donation on behalf of our guests. And this month, the donation is going to Crohn's and colitis, as well as to Childhood Cancer Canada. And I want to thank three wonderful entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial leaders for joining us here today and reminding us of how great Canada is as an entrepreneurial nation, whether it's here or around the world. So thanks, Daryl, Laura, and Jamie, for sharing your time.
Thanks, John.
And inspiring us. This is great. Thank you all for spending time with us today. Follow the conversation and be part of it on Facebook and, of course, on RBC Connect. Our next Disruptors is in September. We're talking about the future of education, back to school, and school is getting to be way different through your whole life. So we're going to have a great conversation about the future of education. October, we've got a session with Singularity University, and in November, we've got Shopify for a special Disruptors. It's going to be fantastic. So thank you all again. Thank you, panelists, for a great